This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 179.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrmann, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with an amazing conversation, an amazing feeling to be back. Full disclosure, it has been a long time since I recorded. It's been an interesting last few months when it is related to the podcast that I actually shared with our guest tonight before recording, Deshaun Washington. Phenomenal conversation. He's a Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, and just a great person, a great conversation. I recorded 175 episodes pretty much without ever missing a week. And just through the last 6 months of Matt leaving the show for the birth of his first child, my wife and I having our fourth, a period of time where I was working as an interim elementary principal, which caused me to need a summer of nothing related to education, just to getting back into the groove of setting some goals and focusing on some priorities. It's all been positive stuff, and it's bothered me that the podcast wasn't at the forefront, but it is again now. And I was trying to set a lot of goals and accomplish a lot of things with the podcast, and I realized I just need to dial back and do what's always been best, and that's a great conversation every week with an amazing guest, and Deshaun does that without a doubt. We talk about a lot. We talk about a lot about student mindset, student goal setting, giving feedback. He gave great structures for how to create systems for students to give each other really valuable feedback, and how it grows throughout the year, and ideas that I never utilized that I absolutely love. And we talk about how that goes into grading and goes into our own conferences and feedback with students. And it was just a really great conversation. He's a phenomenal educator and a really great person, and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So I don't really want to delay any further. I just want to jump right into our conversation with Deshaun Washington. Hi, Deshaun. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Ken. How's it going with you?
I'm very well. I'm excited to be here. So please officially introduce yourself. Let our audience know where you are coming from, and then give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
All right. My name is Deshaun Washington. I am the 2024 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. I've been teaching in the state of Massachusetts over the last 8 years, taught 3 years in Boston Public Schools, teaching third grade, and then in Lexington Public Schools, which is about 25 minutes north of Boston, teaching third grade and now fourth grade. So I've always been in the elementary schools, always worked in that population of students. I would say my journey into education has been one of a unique experience. When I was like 18 years old and I first went into college, I went to school at UMass Boston. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career or with my life. And there was an opportunity to serve through an American program called Jumpstart, which serviced 3 to 5 year old children at the time with reading. So we teach children how to build phonics and rhyming awareness and phonemic awareness and all those good things like that. And I would work with a student every day. It would be every day for like the whole semester. And we will actually build our students up to learn how to read and be able to pick up books and read books on the page based on these teaching practices that we've gained in training. And I was like, wow, this is a really cool experience to see 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds being able to pick up books and to read books and to learn the phonemic skills and the decoding skills of reading. Because to take another step back for a moment, My grandmother taught me how to read at 3 years old. And so when I went into Jumpstart, it was almost like a full circle moment to teach young people at that age how to read the same way my grandmother did, to really spark the imagination of my mind and be able to create vivid images in my mind of how the world is and shaped and curiosity and things like that. So doing Jumpstart was like a great way of giving back and serving, young people the way I was served when I was a kid. And I wanted to do more of that beyond just Jumpstart. And I remember at the time, like I really wanted to get into education and start teaching right then and there. But I've also had a lot of people at the time tell me that, why would you go into education? You're not going to make any money being an educator. You can go into, you go with math, you can do accounting and, run numbers and make a lot of money. And being 19 years old, 20 years old, I'm like, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Why would I go into a profession that where I'm not going to make a whole lot of money when I could do something that I can make money? And so, when I graduated from UMass Boston, I shifted far away from education, which was really my heart and my passion. And I started to do accounting instead for one of the big four accounting firms. And I did that for a few years. I made a lot of good money, but I was not happy with that experience. In fact, I would say probably depressed because I was not doing what I wanted to do, what I was passionate about, but I lost that connection with education because now years have gone by and I wasn't doing that anymore. And I remember it was the spring of 2015. I was looking at a flyer that was at the firm's posted bulletin board, and it said financial literacy through junior achievement, which is another nonprofit organization that teaches kids how to start a business and build a business up. And so I went through the program, go to different schools all across the state, and I would teach about entrepreneurship and revenues and expenses to elementary school kids all around the greater Boston area. And it was like a light bulb went off. It was like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And I quit my accounting job and I went back to school to get my master's degree in elementary education and then special education. And I haven't looked back since. It's been one of the greatest journeys in the world to be able to find your passion, walk in the passion, and then be a servant. As a teacher, you're a servant. You serve your students, and it's enlightening to be able to give them the academic knowledge and life skills that they need to navigate the world around them. So yeah, it's been amazing.
I appreciate you sharing that. What what do you think you gained from your experience in the private sector, being an accountant, that still serves you, maybe served you initially as a teacher and still serves you now? Because we've had many guests on the podcast that teaching was a second career for them. And I think when you have experiences outside of the education world, it really helps bring different dynamics into your classroom. It gives a better understanding, and that's the same with, even if teachers didn't go into a different career, but the life experiences we have obviously impact the way we run and manage and interact with students. But I always like to joke that teachers will always use the phrase, you need to know how to do this, because in the real world, your boss won't give you a second chance, or, whatever phrase they like to say. And I always joke, teachers, we've never been in the real world. We were in school, we went to college, and we went back to school. But, what from that experience in your previous career do you think serves you in the classroom?
I think the greatest experience is the feedback that you receive or the advice that you receive from your employer or from your immediate supervisor. So I think when you talk about real world experience and going into like a field like accounting, for example, there's an output that you need to give and you have a deadlines that you need to meet and you need to be organized with how you organize your papers and your spreadsheets and things like that. And there's time management and there's like you keep an agenda of like all your meetings and all your times you need to be there. And so everything that you learned in school becomes applicable in how you do a job or how you run a business if you was a business owner, right? And so when you go back into the classroom, you're really able to teach the practical application of some of the skills that you're really teaching that's in the classroom, but like how does that applicable to the real world out there? And I think that's one of the biggest messages I give to fourth graders all the time, which I currently serve, is sharing a little bit of light of like, hey, what I'm teaching you now, right? You're going to continue to apply for years and years and years in school, but it becomes now an applicable skill that you will need when you enter the workforce, whether you run your own business or whether you have a job somewhere. You're applying the executive functioning of a clean, organized desk. You're applying time management to complete a task within a certain time frame. You're applying these skill sets that you need, the organization of using your agenda to write your homework down. Same thing to write the meetings down and when you need to go to a meeting. Like you practice these skill sets, and you use them in real life in order to stay organized, stay effective, and be a high quality employee or a high quality business person. So I think that's like where that experience really comes in. And also sharing, like, I stumbled and fallen. Like I was not I was okay accountant, but I wasn't someone that thrived as an accountant either. And sharing those moments of vulnerability of, hey, when you first enter somewhere, it's going to take you some time to develop a skill or develop a trait that you're building up. And some people could just hit off the ground running, just start doing their thing very easily. And then for other people, they have to find the right situation, the right management team, the right leadership team. Maybe they have to have their own community space in order to thrive. And so I share those things with students, and I think it is helpful for them to paint the picture of like, why am I learning what I'm learning? How does that apply when I walk out of the school building each day?
So the executive functioning skills that you mentioned, that's something. So I taught fifth grade for a long time. I'm now an instructional coach, but fifth grade was my jam for a while, and I loved being in the elementary world. How are you explicitly teaching your students the strategies? So you mentioned about talking with them and the value of writing in their agendas and keeping an organized desk. So what are you doing to explicitly introduce those skills to your students? And then how would you say, does your instructional style match or further enforce and further elaborate on the necessity of those skills in your classroom to kind of make it more organic in the class?
Yeah, so to the first part, the way that I model the executive functioning or organization skills is showing them my desk area, right? So like I have my own desk, just like you have your own desk. And then in my desk, like I have things sectioned off so I know where all my materials are. I have my notebooks here. I have my, my pencils here. I have, my coloring notebooks and things like that here. And I organize my stuff in a way where it's easily accessible for me to find. I have my folders where I put every loose leaf paper that's related to the subject area in that same color folder. So when I go over to desk, I can pull out my folder, my blue folder for writing and reading, and reference it with student folders and see if they have the same materials or not. And if they have loose leaf paper, we can identify where that is and for them to put it in the proper folder. It requires that, especially in the beginning of the year when you do this in the school year, it requires time. So you invest time into executive functioning. You invest time into time management and organizing your desk because that's a skill that you're building up kids to have, right? It would be unrealistic for me to go from one subject to another, quick, 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 bam, 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 not give you the space to put papers into folders, organize your workspace appropriately, and transition your materials from one item to another because we're switching to another subject, and then still expect you to have all those things ready and a neat organized desk. So you build that skill over a course of time. And as time goes on, students will be able to do that. The other thing I show them too is that I'm a doctorate student at Vanderbilt University. I'm studying K to 12 leadership and policy at Vanderbilt, earning my EDD, and this is my actually going into my last semester. And I tell the students this because I'm a student as well. So I paint a picture like, yes, I'm a teacher with you, but when I go to Vanderbilt University for classes, I'm a student, just like you are. And the skills that we're talking about together, I apply these skills in my classroom space. So same thing, backpack has a binder. The binder has my loose leaf papers organized into the 3-ring binder, so I can find all my readings that I need in order to engage in discussion. I have my notebook ready so I can take notes, ask questions in there, etc. And I show my students these things to show them that, like, what I'm teaching you is something that I also have to do as part of my own learning as a student, right? So I could be a more effective teacher for you. And so I try to apply the real world experiences with the executive functioning piece to really give kids the understanding that I'm also making an investment in you by going to school to be a better educator and then being able to apply that back to you. So that means what I'm doing in school, I'm reflecting what I'm teaching with you in order to be more effective for you. So it's almost like a circle that's going around of my own investment in education, them seeing that in action, and then us all being able to apply that together. So I think that's really what I try to emphasize a lot, is creating the space in the beginning of the year. And then over the course of time, just making sure that, I'm staying up to date on my organization and my own space in the classroom. Students are able to do the same as well. If you could remind me of the second part of your question.
Is there anything that you do instructionally or your instructional style that kind of organically reinforces the need for organized workspace and students accessing those executive functioning skills?
So in the classroom, if you think of like math, for example, in fourth grade, and you're learning multiplication or you're learning the standard algorithm with addition and subtraction, I have students use anchor charts as a way to reference key materials and for them to also put those anchor charts and design one inside of their working notebook. So when they do math work together and we do like collaborative learning together with students work as a team, they have different resources that they can leverage in order for them to have access to math work, for example. So you have an anchor chart. You have your notes that's inside of your notebook. You have three or four students that are right near you that you can ask questions to discuss more of the math problems together. And it helps me, I think, as a teacher, because if I see that an entire table is unsure what to do or how to solve a problem, and that's going through multiple tables, that's an instructional issue. And I got to bring everyone back to go over that problem again. But when I see that students are able to work together, help one another to wrestle with the problem solving stage or constructive feedback in the writing process or engaging in buddy reading together in that sort of way and leveraging the utensils that's in the classroom, then I think that means that we're building a sense of interdependence between students, right? And I think sometimes in education we miss the interdependence. We go right from dependency to independence, but students are actually in that collaborative learning are doing interdependence where they're learning with and from one another. And I think that's what you really want to get to a space, especially in these younger grades in the upper elementary range. Kids are learning with one another, for one another. And so if you're able to leverage anchor charts and community resources, and then the teacher is now a facilitator of discussion rather than the answer to all the questions, now you have a community space where the kids are learning from one another. Teacher is involved to ask questions and push thinking a little bit deeper. Everybody in the classroom gets a win because everyone's learning from each other. So it amplifies student voice, it amplifies student engagement, while at the same time, teacher is no longer the end all be all of all the answers, but it's just a resource, not the resource in the classroom.
I absolutely love that, and it emulates so much that I was passionate about in my own classroom. How do you so you talked about and I love the phrase you use, you invest time in your students in the beginning of the year to explicitly teach these executive functioning skills that are going to benefit them throughout the year. And frankly, you get that time back tenfold because it saves so much time in transitions and other aspects throughout the year. So how do you invest in your students to build capacity for this interdependent learning? What are you doing to teach your students what it looks like to help each other, what it looks like to support each other, to collaborate, to support each other's learning versus just giving each other the answers, or talking too much and becoming distracting, or what are you doing to help them build those skills up to accomplish that?
Absolutely. So there are multiple steps that we take here. The first is that we create an anchor chart in the beginning of the year, dividing up supportive feedback and constructive feedback. Because if you think about feedback is really an ongoing process. It's not something that you get at the end of an assignment when it's already done and you can't complete it anymore. It's something that you can make an adjustment to on the fly. And so in the beginning of the year, to build community and to build trust with each other, we give what we call supportive feedback. These are the wins of the work that you're doing. These are the wins that we see in your writing, for example. Let's use writing as an example. You're writing a narrative, you're telling a story, a realistic fiction story. When a student does peer review, they acknowledges the wins of your writing. So this could be something as simple as, I love how your writing includes explicit details of what character dialogue, to specific points of what characters say, or how you use paraphrasing in this paragraph rather than quoting a character in this part. And the supportive feedback is designed for students to have a feel-good moment about their writing, and also to leverage the opportunity for kids to see other types of writing and be able to like, oh, I could definitely try something like that in my own writing. As the year goes, we start to introduce this other thing called constructive feedback. This is what we use in writing, since we're using writing as an example, to say, how can we make our writing even better? So we'll continue to give the supportive feedback, but then we also have students give each other like, here's a way that your writing can actually be enhanced or improved or even be better for the next time. So this could be something like grammar, making sure that you're using past and present tense, to something that's more specific, like, hey, tell us a little bit more about when that kid was very angry about losing a soccer game. What did they do? You just told us they were angry, but give us something that they actually done. And here is when you've built the trust of knowing I'm going to receive that supportive feedback, that positive reinforcement. And the constructive feedback is not to be like, aha, got you moment, but it's actually supposed to be meant for students to see, oh, like, because you care about my work so much, you are invested in my work to know that I got something I can improve. And because you gave me that advice, I'm more likely to implement that in my own writing to be more effective. The other thing that, and I was writing this down as you was asking this question, that we do, especially when we have peer feedback in the classroom, is making writing and reading goals explicit for the peer reviewer to do. So goals should be, if a writer's goal is that they're going to write a descriptive paragraph on a time that they lost a soccer game, that's the goal, let's say. That goal needs to be explicit for the teacher, the student who's writing the story, and the peer reviewer. So this way, when the peer reviewer is reviewing and giving supportive, constructive feedback, the feedback is tailored directly to the goal that's in mind. So it's public, so that way the reviewer, the peer reviewer, also knows what your end goal is and is working towards that goal. The research shows in education that for literacy in particular, goals need to be actually explicit for the kid who's trying to reach the goal and everyone who's working with that student towards that goal, teacher and students. And this could be any grade level, right? I'm just using fourth grade as an example. This could be at any grade level up in the upper grades. If that is explicit and is clear, then the feedback you get is also explicit and clear. and you're not getting feedback that's like secondary or tertiary needs that like is irrelevant to the goal. You're getting it that's directly related to the goal as well. So that's what we try to do in the classroom, and it makes the conversations a little more accountable, more effective, because everyone's walking in there with something in mind that they need to do to improve their work or to improve their writing or to give feedback for their writing.
I love the types of feedback. So is that's an anchor chart that you said you make towards the beginning of the year. Do you create a supportive and constructive feedback anchor chart in general, or is it specific to writing? Then you make them for different subjects. How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so it's general in nature. The most time I use is really in the writing stages of our class, and sometimes in reading as well. But yeah, it's generally used, and the purpose of it, it's really to get increase student engagement, increase student voice, to be investors in other students while also being an investor in your own learning, to know your goals, to know what your purpose is for writing a particular article or particular essay, and getting that feedback that you need from your peers as well as your teachers.
Yeah, that's great. When you were talking about the peer editing, I was trying to dig through my Google Drive archives because I remember towards the end of my time in fifth grade, improving my crafts year in and year out, my peer editing uh, documents that I would have the kids use is they would write what they were looking for from their peer. So it could be as simple as, do you like the story or not? Right? Just like, don't critique anything. I don't want any change recommendations. Like, did you just enjoy it? Did you enjoy the story or not? Why or why not? Or I want you to look at only grammar, spelling, organization, punctuation, not again, feedback on the content of the story. Or like you said, is my problem well developed, or is the rising action well developed? Like, so I really tried to get the students, because one, I found that peer editing was highly ineffective because the editor was just randomly correcting or changing things or didn't really have a focus. But two, I found that the quality of the writing was better because it was getting the students to focus on, like, what makes my writing piece good for persuasive writing or for narratives or for whatever we're working on. So getting them to think about, what do I want someone to look for, and am I even doing that good enough to have someone to look at it before that? So I really love that. Do the students, as you progress through the year, do you ever hear the students saying to each other, hey, all I want right now is supportive feedback, or all I want right now is constructive feedback? Like, I can just imagine a classroom where they're, regardless of subject, that the students are kind of using that language to say to someone like, listen, I'm not looking for any critiques. Like, just tell me, like, is this good or not? Like, do you enjoy it or not? I'm looking for supportive feedback. Do you see that happening?
Got it, Ken. That's exactly it. So in the beginning, it's all supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants that supportive feedback. They want that back rub, that hug of like, everything's good. I like what you're doing here, here, and here. And you see the shift where constructive feedback becomes the norm. And it becomes the norm really because now they've built a trust system of, you're invested in my writing and you authentically care about how well this writing is. And you also like allow me to give you feedback as well. So I'm more welcoming to also receive the same thing back. So you see a shift. Kids don't even ask for supportive feedback anymore. It's almost exclusively constructive feedback. And within the constructive feedback, kids give supportive feedback. But it's like they know, like, I'm going to walk away with an action that I need to do in my writing. Because one, I know what your goal is. I know what the ultimate goal that you have for persuasive writing. And so because I know your goal, I know what kind of constructive feedback I need to give you. And number two, because I could give you that constructive feedback, and I know that you're going to actually use that feedback to advance yourself towards your writing goal, I'm more likely to hand you that type of feedback. You're more likely to use it. And we'll also both will see that your writing has increased in productivity because of the measure of what you need to give for writing. So yeah, kids easily go from supportive to constructive relatively quickly. And it's amazing to see. The thing I wanted to share real quick is that with when it comes to the feedback piece, is that we talk about how feedback is ongoing. When I get to meet with students and I get to, have that finalization, that's what I call like the advice stage, right? So if I graded it already and hand it back to them, I give advice rather than feedback. I read this article and I forget the title of it, but it was a high school student that made an argument that when you give me feedback on a graded assignment, what am I supposed to do with it? You already graded it and you already scored this assignment. It's nothing for me to do. Give me advice on on next time. And I was very intrigued by the language that this high school student used. And so I started to use that same thing. That like if I graded something already, that I give advice of some things that I would recommend for you to do for the next time, rather than feedback that you can't go back and make changes to. Because we went from persuasive writing now to narrative writing or informational writing. So at the end, I tried to give advice in that sort of way where like, hey, when you ever do this again, here's some things to consider, right? And I think that that element gives kids the distinction of like, what is feedback? I could go make ongoing changes in the moment versus advice. Here's something I need to reflect on so that the next time I do this, I can apply those skills.
I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but I know why your accounting career didn't work out. You've spent this entire conversation talking about writing instead of math. So clearly you chose the wrong passion when you took that career. I had two things that I wanted to ask you that I still want to, but on the note you were saying about advice, I love that. And this could apply definitely for elementary teachers, but I think it's a little bit more challenging because elementary teachers were typically going through very different writing genres, right? You're typically like narrative, then maybe biography, then poem. Like there's big distinctions. Where secondary teachers, they typically do a few more writing pieces, and I think they usually stick to a genre a little bit more. But I was working with a high school teacher who was a little frustrated that felt students weren't using feedback on graded assignments when it was being returned. So they were just looking at the grade and they were moving on. And so we talked about a few different strategies. Like one was using some audio feedback embedded into the Google Docs instead of written so the students can listen to the teacher, which also allowed the teacher to add more advice easier because it's a lot easier just to say it versus to type it out or write it out. But we also created a grid just in Google Slides, a basic four-corner grid where the students, after reviewing the, I'm going to say advice now instead of feedback, from the teacher, they had to fill in 4 boxes. It was strengths identified from the teacher, areas of improvement from the teacher, and then a box where they could ask questions or comments not addressed by the teacher. And then the 4th box is how well did I use previous feedback, or I would say advice now. So the first writing assignment, they only filled out those first 3. The second writing assignment, the idea was the students should go back to this and say, okay, I'm really good at XYZ. I need to make sure I use XYZ in my writing. My last project, the teacher recommended that I insert advice. So now on this next writing piece, there should be an improvement in that recommendation. And so it was a slideshow that just built throughout the year. So it might end with 4 or 5 different slides, and you can see the progression of advice, and you should kind of see like the advice rolling from one into the next. So it was a strategy that the teacher really found successful. And the other big portion was I told the teacher, you have to give the time to the kids to listen to all of your advice in class and fill this out in class, because they're not going to do it as a choice optional for homework, but also to show the students like, I really spend a lot of time giving you this advice. I really want you to review it. So you're being explicit in giving them that time in class. But I really like the idea of saying advice over feedback. That's interesting. You talked about grading, which was my least favorite thing out of everything in the world of being an elementary teacher, was
Great.
grading writing. Not just grading, grading math tests. Yeah, it's boring on a Friday night, but it is what it is. But grading writing,
My goodness,
disturbed me to my core, because I felt like if I wasn't giving them an A, I was crushing their spirits as writers. And I even remember as a high school student, I was always like an average writer, not super passionate about it, but usually liked it a little bit. And I specifically remember writing a story about a teacher who was a superhero, right?
Yep.
So like Clark Kent is Superman.
Mm-hmm.
It was the greatest story I had ever written in my life. And my teacher gave me a B-. And I will never forget that. And I remember part of the feedback being the format of the story, because chapters would bounce back between like teacher, superhero.
Yeah.
And they didn't like the format. And in my mind, I thought, well, that was the format I wanted. So I couldn't stand grading writing because I never knew how to do it right for my students. So what are your thoughts, and do you have any advice for teachers when it comes to grading writing?
Well, I mean, first of all, it sounds like that story that you wrote was a really good one. I would love a copy if you ever still have to learn.
That's back in the days of pre-technology. So well, there was technology, but that was when files lived on the computer you typed it on. So that computer's probably been long recycled.
Recycle it a few times over. Absolutely. I do have a little bit of feedback. So, and you're right. The concept of grading, especially at the elementary level, is a daunting task when we're talking about writing, because it's subjective. Yes, you have a rubric. Yes, you have PLC meetings where you're meeting with your grade level teams and all that. But at the end of the day, you're making choice decisions on, how this narrative story, this informational piece is written, how this poem is written. And, I mean, you could put two together, and depending upon the day, that could be an 80 or a 90, or depending upon the day. I've read and I've spoken to some other state teachers of the year, and one of them, what they do at their school is that they actually sit down with the students and they work together on a grade. So they'll ask questions to the student about their writing, or in this case, they do engineering. They ask them about their process of solving particular problems or creating designs, and like what their mindset, what were their mindset was on those problems, and how do they go about drawing up their design and the elements of it and things like that. And then they come to a consensus together on a grade based on the rubric and then based on student feedback. So it's less that of the teacher just creating like an arbitrary grade, but using a combination of the rubric and student input for the grade. Now, when I spoke to them, like, well, how do you know that like someone's not just like, well, I'm gonna get my 100, don't just go up there and get 100, right? And the conversation was, well, if you're when you're doing like a self-reflection, you're going to be honest about your self-reflection. One, because you've had all this peer feedback, you had all of this kind of like goal setting, right? And so now you'll be able to measure like, hey, did you really meet your goal based on the feedback that you received earlier? Now let's talk about it so we could give you some advice about that moving forward. And so naturally, you're creating an authentic conversation with students to do some self-reflection. And so, well, you know what? I did get some really good feedback, but I didn't really use any of that. I just was like, nah, it's not beneficial. Well, yeah, well, I see now that like we needed that feedback because of this, right? And so now, you have that dialogue with students, and students are able to give input, but also be very honest with you about what their process was as they went through an activity, and be able to name, I did this, I did this, I did not do this, I did not do this. And yeah, because of that, like I could see like I should get this score or some range of this scoring here. So using students as thought partners, beneficial. It gives them accountability, gives them responsibility, it gives autonomy and agency. You're doing all those things for students when they're able to sit down with teacher to wrestle with a grade or wrestle with a score that they have, and really get to hear from their lens like what they were thinking at the time. Because sometimes it just gives you clarity, like, oh, like I see this gap and we need to address it. Oh, I didn't realize you was thinking that way. You might be onto something with that. Tell me more about it. And so when you have that partnership, students also feel that sense of agency, that ownership of their learning. And so again, they're more likely to be honest about that reflection. So I'm trying to use that same thing that I've seen and read about now from other state teachers of the year in my cohort, and apply this now in elementary and see like what those discussions are going to look like, how they're going to sound like, and what are the results are going to be as we go along. Because I know like not everyone's going to just say 100. I know like it's actually going to be a deep discussion, and probably they're going to probably say something even lower than what I was going to say, because they probably are harsher critics of their own work. So it's almost like some of them I got to build back up a little bit. Like, no, you actually was better than that, than what you said you was. But to have that lens of student perspective also helps when you start talking about family teacher conferences, right? And having that report card in front of them, or having these grades in front of them, and mention it to family. Your child actually was part of this discussion. These notes, this feedback, this advice that they were given, a lot of that was your child's input. And this is what they said about their writing. This is why they said 75% is what they have right now, because they didn't do this and this. And if they do it the next time, they know that their grade will go up.
Yeah, I think that reflection is so important, because it's not just a skill you're developing in writing, right? It's that idea of being self-reflective and self-aware that I tried to create in my classroom as much as possible. And I try to do myself. And that's what I tell teachers, especially new teachers that I'm working with as a coach. And I'll always tell them, if you can be a reflective teacher, you will be a successful teacher, because everybody's got something to learn. Everybody has something to improve upon. And if you're willing to reflect on your own practice and reflect with others, then you're going to continue to grow. And teaching a fourth grader or a third grader how to have those conversations is so valuable, because it can apply to so many other things. And I would tell my students all the time, you shouldn't be surprised about any grade on any test and any report card. And they would always, the buzz when you're passing out report cards, when you used to pass out paper report cards, if you don't anymore, but they would always like I'm so nervous. I'd always say, like, there shouldn't be any surprises on here. Like, you saw what your tests look like. Were all of your tests good? Yeah. Well, then your report card grades are going to be good. Like, there's no surprises here. And even when it came time to take a test, I would tell them I would always have them create study plans for the tests we were working on, and even have them look at the schedule. So if a study guide went out on a Tuesday and the test was the next Tuesday, I would have them make a basic grid: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all the way through to the next Monday. And I would say the first thing I want you to do is cross out the days that are busy. If you have back-to-back sports or back-to-back instrument lessons or whatever on Wednesday nights, cross it out. You're not studying. You don't need to study for 7 days. You need to study maybe like 3 times for 20 to 25 minutes, really focused and really good. You don't need all 7 days. And so again, that reflective practice, because they would turn in that study guide that study plan with the test, and they would have to write what they actually did. And so again, it got them to reflect on, okay, well, let's look at the study plan. I followed my study plan and I did well on the test, whether that's an A, a B, or a C comparative to what they normally do.
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't study and I didn't do well. Okay, again, no surprises. But also, there were times where I did study and I didn't do well. And
Mm,
so then I could have a conversation with the student. What does studying look like? Who are you studying with? How long, like, is the TV on in front of you? Like, having reflective conversations to get them to think about that. And so, again, with doing that with the grading, that's just, it's so important because you're developing a skill that
yeah.
is applicable across anything.
Yeah. And it allows also for the reflection, like, are you studying in the morning versus the evening hours? Are you studying and there's like a high pressure time while you're studying? You're trying to do other things in the house, and like, you can't really sit down and focus. You just have this book and you just kind of glancing at it as you're cooking with, with family, or if you're having dinner or something like that. So many variables I love about that idea of the study plan and how to operate, and creating accountability to practice, and recognizing too for students, like, because there are kids that probably would say, like, I gotta study every day. I'm going to study 7 times. I'm going to figure out an hour, to also reduce that pressure of, like, you actually don't need to do all that. Give like 2, 3 solid sessions of 30 minutes. You're going to be golden going into it, because based on these cooldowns and these exit tickets, I already seen you're able to do that. From the quiz, I already seen, so I already could kind of predict how you're going to perform anyway on that math test. But to practice and study, hey, 2 times, 30 minutes, a couple problems here or there. Here's a do now when you come in the morning for morning work. It's just like a practice problem similar to what you see on it. That's going to also help to inform me of like how prepared you are for the assessment. So that's a great strategy.
Definitely. And it's really helpful for parents too, when
Mhm.
they get used to seeing it and they get used to looking for it, because, you know, parents want to help as much as they can, but parents are busy
Parents,
and they have jobs that may align with school hours, that may not align with school hours. So it can be helpful for parents too, to say, like, okay, what are the 2 nights that we're studying? And so it's really helpful for them too. Um, so you've mentioned a lot of strategies for giving feedback in writing. You talk about your student supportive and constructive feedback, and then the advice giving when the paper is graded. What else are you doing to help manage your time in conducting writing conferences with students? Because it frankly just becomes a time problem in the classroom. So do you have any strategies for just allowing you to have the time and the capacity to have writing conferences with students throughout the writing process, not after that final piece?
it is certainly helpful if you have multiple adults that services your classroom, because what you can do is you can schedule every adult that serves your classroom to meet with a few students a day. You don't have to meet with every single student, right? You can meet with 2 students per adult. If you have 2 or 3 adults in your room at a time during writing, for example, you can schedule them to meet with a caseload plus another student, so they can kind of see a range of writing. And I think that's helpful because it reduces the amount of, like, I gotta go see this person. So you don't have quality discussion with students on their writing. You have quality discussions with students on writing, spending that 10 minutes. And then the notes, when we take notes for student writing, that's actually gets passed to either the next teacher or the peer reviewer to look at and to add notes to. And that ultimately goes to the student to see all the notes of, like, hey, this is what you're working on, this is what you're excelling in, this is what the area that you're going to make improvements in towards this goal that we have established in the very beginning of the writing course. And I think when you have that partnership of multiple layers of teachers, classroom teacher, special education teacher, paraeducator, along with, the peer reviewer, for example. You're getting 3 or 4 different lenses of examination of writing one full story on one sheet of paper that belongs to that student has that goal and can really see like all the conversations, see everything that they're working on, and see all their improvements. So when you have that advice conversation, you got the paper. This is what Miss Jones said. This is what I said. This is what Isaac said over here, and and this is where your goal ended up reaching to. And tell me a little bit more about why you use this particular feedback, but not this particular one. And you have those conversations because now you have everything documented. And again, something you can hand to parents as well. Here's a series of conversations that went between your child, teacher, child, teacher, child, peer reviewer. So
Yeah.
that's how it goes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And uh, I think when you think about writing conferences, in my opinion, I always felt that there was 2 things I was trying to do. One, I was trying to teach a personalized skill to the students, and the other capacity is making sure student writing pieces are being read. Right, that's like the biggest detriment that you can do, that frankly I know I didn't do well enough when I started teaching, is making sure everything that students are writing is read by multiple people and trying to give them authentic audiences, you included, but also their peers, their parents, whoever.
Yeah.
But when it came to teaching the skills, I always found it challenging to meet with a class of 30 kids and to meet one-on-one. And so what I started doing was, when I when I was having writing conferences, I would find that I was having the same conversation 7 times in a row. Let's just say it was on using sensory details, right? You have, right. So I would group the kids together based on previous writing pieces or based on as I was walking around and circulating and reading and looking for common things. And I would pull them together, and the writing conference wouldn't necessarily be me reading their writing piece, but having a exemplar writing piece available that we would evaluate together. And I would highlight, let's look at the use of sensory details and, hit on that mini lesson and then say, okay, now look at your writing piece. I want you to highlight 4 spots where you can add sensory details in. So I was still accomplishing that skill development and that personalized approach to what they needed in their writing. But I was meeting with 5, 6, 7, 3, however many kids at once.
Yes.
And it became manageable from a time perspective to do that. And now with AI, I mean, the ability to make exemplar writing pieces on the fly is just incredible, because you can say, give me a personal narrative with sensory details on a 3rd grade writing level, and it gives you something good enough where you're highlighting that skill. So that's a huge time saver now too for teachers.
Time saver, and what you brought up too is something that's missing a lot in school, in our public schooling right now, is that tier 2 instruction. How important that actually is. We spend a lot of time on whole group instruction, the tier 1, and the services as like the tier 3, but that small group instruction in the classroom at tier 2, and being able to identify a commonality of student needs and then be able to meet with them in those groups and be able to build a skill and then be able to work on those skills together and then be able to send them off to practice. And then you could take it a step further. 2 of those kids could come together to review each other's sensory details and give each other the feedback on that and be able to apply that in their own writing. That's so critical that we need to do more with our classroom teachers, is being able to really emphasize on that small group instruction where we really can hone in on some skills that maybe in the whole group that we either just don't cover, or it's more just generalized, but it's more specific here in this tier 2 group, and that they can be leveraged for our students. So very good call there.
Yeah, I like what you said too. You have those kids working together, and they they circle the spot in their own writing piece where they're going to change or improve or modify based on the instruction. And then you say, okay, when you're done, meet with someone in this group and give each other constructive feedback on how they changed their writing piece based on what we talked about in this mini lesson. And so now you're further leveraging that skill and that system in your class. All right. I'm enjoying this conversation immensely, but I don't want to talk forever. So I do want to jump into the exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions that we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Okay, so we could do a few things. I think the biggest thing is greeting in the morning. So when a student comes in, put their things in a locker, personalized greetings, dabs, high fives, handshakes, the dance, the side hugs if the student wants a hug, something that just acknowledges the visible presence of that student in the morning. I think sets the tone. A mentor teacher told me before, you might be the first person that says good morning to one of these students that come in the room in the morning. So you can't just have them just walk in and be invisible. You want to say their name, acknowledge them, handshake, or whatever the greeting is that is agreed upon from the student, to acknowledge presence and to acknowledge that they're in school today. So critical, because now the buy-in, recognizing that they're getting that from the teacher. And if you build community right, they get that from other students too when they walk in the classroom in the morning. So that's like the biggest win right there.
I love that. And even if it's just direct eye contact, good morning, Deshaun. That's it. It doesn't even need to be anything. I love I love all of those other pieces, and especially if you're comfortable with that as a teacher. But even if you just ensure that it's direct eye contact and it's good morning and their name, is more than enough to make them feel visible.
Absolutely.
What is the best advice you've ever received, whether it be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student?
Okay, so recently I had to do a preliminary defense for my capstone project at Vanderbilt. And so I'm in a guided reading group, and I have a group of students that I'm reading with. And I don't know how it got to the conversation that, on Friday I go to Vanderbilt and I got to do this presentation. I don't know how it got there. And one of my students, he gave some advice to me. He said, you are the expert of your presentation, not the professor, not the people. You are the expert. And so you're going to walk in there like you are the expert. You're going to present because you know your material. You've been studying your material. And he said that if you do well, you're going to do well again in April. He said, if you don't do well, get the feedback. And then you apply that feedback the way you tell us to apply the feedback. You're going to go back, you're going to do the changes, and then you're going to go up there in April and you're going to do it right the second time. And I said, Dag, I really needed that piece of advice right now. I needed that feedback. So thank you. I'm going to apply that feedback now to my work. And I still don't even remember how that conversation even came up. But he was very adamant and was very confident in sharing that with me. So that was the best advice I've gotten.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The school year goes in waves. There are those days and weeks that we struggle to survive. What is something that every educator needs to hear in that moment to power up and surpass it?
To remember that as a teacher, we are learners. We are the model of learning, right? And when we learn in engaging in the act of learning in our classroom space, whether it's learning about our students, learning about situations that our students are in, and being able to help them to resolve a conflict or a situation, or whether that is just simply engaging in the changing of the season that is of teaching that happens all the time, taking a stance and engagement of learning to put yourself in that situation of recognizing that as a teacher, I model learning. And every day I come into work, I'm engaging in learning. So every situation I'm in is a learning experience for me to be more effective and to be better in the craft as a teacher. And sometimes that does mean that I take a half a step back for 4 steps forward, because when I take the step back, I get to learn more about my students and their situations, be able to support them better. So when I take steps with them forward, I understand who they are and their being and where they're going and they're becoming. So, take the stance of a learner and be okay being a learner in front of students, because that's where, as teachers, that's who we're really supposed to be, models of learning.
I love that. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
I think to be an innovator requires you, in teaching, especially today in this post-pandemic era, it requires you to spend quality time with students, circles, to for everyone to build community with each other. So there's the restorative circle that, at this point, a lot of people know about. One type of circle that I've implemented in my classroom is an empathy circle. So rather than 20 or 25 people in this large circle, you're in small groups of like 4 or 5 people in these circles. And what innovation does in this moment is that you're creating a small, intimate group of community members to talk out certain issues, to do problem solving activities together, to complete games together, and to solve issues that might come up within the community space or in the larger space. And you're building that with an intimate group of people that you're building a community with over the course of the year. So it's almost like you have 4 new people that are like, if anything goes on, these are the 4 people that's in my circle that I could talk to about an issue. And how that is innovative is knowing that there's layers to the level of support. Because sometimes something might happen in school and you really don't need to go straight to, an administrator or a parent. You can start with a classmate to talk about it and have certain skills to be able to resolve that issue. And teacher may not even know that was an issue to begin with, because you have those skills of solving it. And then there might be another layer where, like, all right, I tried this circle, I tried my group, that didn't work. Yo, Mr. Washington, can you tell me, like, how do I navigate this and be able to support them? And then sometimes it might be like, I tried a circle, that didn't hit. Mr. Washington, I tried, but you know what? This is probably when I need to go ask mom and dad at the house to like help intervene on this one, because this is a bigger issue than just a classroom thing. It's a bigger issue than just, Mr. Washington coming in and just giving the look and then everything's okay. This might be one I need to go. So we have like different layers of support that the empathy circle creates to allow for solving conflicts or allow for to voice ideas or concerns. And it's an innovative way for building autonomy, building agency, while also recognizing you have multiple layers of support that you can use as a channel to engage in life lessons. And so I think that's the way that's been very helpful for me as a teacher over the last few years. It's just creating more spaces for those discussions with students, and allowing students to have spaces to resolve issues as they go along and be able to talk those out. And most of the time, I don't even be knowing what those issues were, because they always say, hey, we had this issue and then we talked about it and it worked. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And it's only when it's like, we tried and that didn't work, we need intervention. That's when I could come in. Or that's when, if it doesn't work with me, that's when family could come in and have that conversation and pull me into the side, and we could all have that conversation together. But yeah, I think that's like a really big key to developing a sense of urgency, or a sense of like just ownership of things that happen in your classroom space for students.
That's awesome. So last question, how can our audience connect with you in the future, follow along with anything on social media or anything else that they can stay in touch with you?
You can stay in touch with me. You can find my name on LinkedIn, Deshaun Washington. You could type my name in and boom, will pop up 2024 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. I have a YouTube channel called Cultivating Changemakers and a business called Cultivating Changemakers. You can visit the website for Cultivating Changemakers, llc.org. You could log on. You can, see the work that we do in building a 4-step process for classroom teachers to build authentic relationships with students that lead to outcomes for students. And we do this through a 4-step process of seed planting, which is getting to know your student and getting to know who they are. Watering is pouring in your investment into them and encouraging them to walk in their passion, walk into their goals for the year. The pruning stage is that constructive feedback, if you will, to help them to take out some of the old and plant new seeds of confidence and new seeds of like innovation. And then the harvest is building up what we call change makers, students who have the capacity to resolve conflicts with one another, to read to younger students, or to be innovative and creating strategies for making a school more green or making a school more of a safe, productive space for everybody. So that's what we do in Cultivating Changemakers. You can see my videos on YouTube, Cultivating Changemakers, the website, cultivatingchangemakers.llc.org, LinkedIn, just type my name. You'll be able to find me on there. And yeah, we're just getting started. So I'm sure you'll hear my name around a lot more as the time goes on. But yeah, that's how you can stay in touch.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. I appreciate your story in the beginning and just your advice and your ideas that you shared. And it's just been a valuable conversation for me, and I know for our audience as well. So thank you for everything you do. And your school is clearly very lucky to have you. So thank you again. And I appreciate your time. And to our listeners, thank you for your time. And if you haven't yet, please recommend this podcast to a colleague or a friend, because I think the value of these conversations lies within, just like Deshaun has showed us, there's great educators every week that are just showing the value of what they do and reinforcing and encouraging what we do in our own classrooms and giving us ideas of new strategies to try. So Deshaun, thank you again. And as we power down this episode, you definitely left this feeling powered up.
We're empowered up. Thank you so much, Ken. And to all the listeners, thank you for listening. And I hope that you're empowered and inspired by the words today. And I look forward to hearing the good news in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.